do something here. Oh, we got a little bit of woo-woo in the sound. Today is the third Sunday of Advent. The first Sunday we lit a candle for hope. Yeah? And it's the hope that is that deep awareness that something incredible is always ready to happen. Something miraculous, something beyond anything we've ever thought was possible is always about to happen. The second candle of Advent, so that was the first Sunday. That would be the first Sunday in December normally, or the last one in November. The second candle for Advent is recognizing that there is a promise of peace, a promise of possibility in peace. So we've opened our hearts to the hope of something miraculous. And the second one is recognizing the peace. In the traditional Christian world, that first Sunday we would have been listening to the prophecies of Isaiah, telling us that someday there was going to be this incredible being born who would be able to bring together all the nations in peace. That's from the Hebrew scriptures. And then in the second Sunday, we would have been reading from the prophecies of John the Baptist, this young man who was out in the wilderness saying, hey, everybody, the world's about to be something entirely different. You might want to think about letting go of your old thought patterns. The third Sunday is today. And today we honor the mother. Today that we light the candle that is sometimes called love and sometimes called joy. I like it, the joy candle. We're honoring the Annunciation. This is the day when a very young woman woke up to the realization that, oh my goodness, I am about to bear a child, and that child is God. And guess what? Everyone who's ever born a child has had to wake up to that realization. So welcome to Advent. Now, why am I talking about Advent? I grew up in a rather strange environment. As some of you know, grandmother worked for Gandhi, mom worked for the Defense Department. But they both were working for peace in the world. They both were committed to a world of peace. And they both were absolutely committed to the concept that every single one of us makes a difference. So Mom started me out in the Unitarian Church, and I had a good time until I realized I wanted to understand what this Jesus thing was about and what that spiritual stuff. Why do we do Easter? Why do we do Christmas? And unfortunately, great as the Hyde Park Unitarian Church is in Chicago, they didn't teach their kids any of that stuff. So I walked out at 7. And when I was 10 or so, my neighbor down the street said, you know, I get to sing in this choir. You want to come sing with me? And I said, sure. It was the Baptist church. So I did the Baptist church through middle school. And then we moved to California. My mother said, this time I'm choosing which choir you're singing in. She chose the Presbyterian. Very interesting environment, I got to tell you. The Presbyterian church that serves Stanford University. And so it very, broad-minded as Presbyterian churches go. And when I was 16, some of you have heard this, I was invited to deliver the Sunday sermon. Blew my mind. I was in my agnostic phase, and so, as you may recall, I chose the reading from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. So then I got to college, and my college roommate came in the second term, and the first roommate went on and got married, so I got a new roommate the second term, and she came to school, and she didn't know anything or anyone in the area, and she was Catholic, so I escorted her to the Newman Center. So I started attending Catholic Mass. Soon after Vatican II, I had attended in my various environments and explorations, had actually attended a pre-Vatican II Mass. You know, the one where the priest is doing this. Didn't mean a whole lot to a whole lot of people. But by the time Vatican II happened, it was, blessed are we, Lord, and it was the folk guitar, right? Yeah. And all that good stuff, and I was going, hey, this is pretty cool. And it was about love, and that was pretty cool. Well, and then I started dating this guy. We ended up getting engaged, and sooner or later got married. And guess what? He was Catholic. 15 years in the Catholic Church. Well, in between those two things, I was spending my Fridays through Saturdays, Fridays through Sundays, with my Jewish family. So on Friday night, we'd do Shabbat, and we'd hold up the wine. Blessed are you, Lord God of creation, right? Oh, wow. And then we'd hold up the bread, and we'd light the candles, and we'd do these things. And guess what? Sunday morning, hold up the wine. Blessed are you, Lord God of creation. Oh, my goodness. So by my second term in college, I was committed. I'd already explored a variety of traditions, and there was this course. It was called Comparative Religions in the Department of Anthropology. It was an upper division class. I was a freshman, but I was going. I was doing this. And I was 17, and I took this class, Comparative Religions. And it just, I was still kind of in my agnostic phase. It was like, can we really trust that there is any kind of divine power in this universe? I mean, look at all the things that are wrong on this planet, right? But I studied the Maori, and I studied the Senegalese, and I studied the all of these different traditions from all over the world. Some of you may recall a book called Comparative Religions by Lessa and Vogt, D-O-G-T. That was our text. And our instructor was a man who had almost lived with the Navajos for decades. Right? Nibs Hill. And it was just so alive and so real. And by about 2/3 of the term, I'm going, well, if every human culture on the planet knows that there is, or believes that there is this power out there, I guess I'll try it on. I'll try that on. So the whole time I'm, going to Mass with my beloved roommate and ultimate fiance and husband, and I'm going, is this real? Is this real? And every Friday night I'm going, I'm feeling something here. Is this real? And so through college, that was the place that I was in. But everywhere I looked, there was, an unfolding of a relationship with something that was more powerful than us. Now, I had not yet heard about 12 steps and the higher power, but I think that was where I was. Well, one of the things that I read as I was moving through my anthropology major was a little book that some of you may be familiar with. It's called the Bhagavad Gita. It is the only book, well, it and the Bible are the two things that Gandhi used. He went back and forth between the New Testament and the Bhagavad Gita. Back and forth and back and forth. And it turned out that Reverend Martin Luther King went back and forth between the Old and New Testament and the Bhagavad Gita. And if you have ever been to his museum in Atlanta, there's a whole room dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi, and a copy of his Gita is put on display in that room. So, with that in mind, we're going to have some pictures. And what I would like us to explore is what it was, not that is said in the Gita, but is what is said in what Aldous Huxley wrote in the front of the Gita. Now, first what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Unitarian-Universalist principles, okay? Not the principles, the sources. We have 7 principles and 6 sources. So these are our 6 sources as Unitarian-Universalists. The first one we talked about, the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures. That was my opening. Then, wisdom from the world religions down there in point 3, and in the last point, it's hard to read, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions. All right? So, as Unitarian Universalists, we don't just rely on what we think up. We draw on a wonderful set of traditions. Now, some of the books that are out there that help us understand that include this wonderful Livergood book. He goes back all the way into the Greek and Roman era and helps us see that the Philosophia Perennis has been available for thousands of years. Okay? And then Osho Bhagwan Rajneesh spent 2 huge volumes on the subject. Frithjof Schuon, most people don't know, but he was a Sufi who died in the 60s, and he was from Europe, and he came over to Indiana. The Sufi mystic teacher in Indiana. Isn't that marvelous? And his writings are very powerful and lyrical, so if you want to get into his stuff, you can just go online and check them out. And then in my coursework, in both what I took and what I teach, I found Ken Wilber's book, No Boundary, to be absolutely fabulous. Because what he does is he says, we have ages and stages in our development. I'm going to go back to that later. But and each one of those has its own therapy and its own religious tradition. So when we're at a certain age and stage in our spiritual development, this set of things helps us. And when we go on to the next one, this next set of things help us. It's a wonderful thing. He's got a graph. You don't even have to read the book. But this is what woke me up intellectually to what I had been feeling in those initial courses. When Aldous Huxley, he was a humanist. He was one of the great humanists of our 20th century. And he wrote a bunch of novels. Most of them you are familiar with, Brave New World. Okay, my favorite of his work is something called Island, which is his reverse of Brave New World. You might want to look at it. It's his last book, written in the 60s. It's his utopian novel, as opposed to his dystopian novel. And that was part of my field of study in graduate school, so I had to do that. But what he's doing in the Perennial philosophy is gone through all that literature we looked at in the other slide, and he's looked at a lot of religious traditions. He actually went to India and he studied. And he took LSD and he studied. And what he was doing was saying, I'm finding that regardless of the religious tradition that I look at, I'm finding the same points. And he basically found 7 or 8, depending on how you cut it, points that were common to all the world's traditions. And ultimately, this was his line, that the rudiments of it are maybe found in the traditionary lore of, quote, primitive peoples. You know, that was how people talked before the 60s, right? We call them indigenous cultures now. We recognize there is nothing primitive about these cultures, right? But they're in that tradition in all regions of the world, and then it's fully developed. That is, to the extent that we can talk about it. And again, for him, that means it was written down and explicated in point after point after point in the 8 major world traditions. So, religions. So what he's saying is, we're going to find these things everywhere we look. Now, a guy in French, you don't have to study this at all, but I'm just going to point out that he's looking at different parts of the world had different angles on the same stuff. Okay? So this is in French, this is the 20s. Up in the northeast, we have Protestantism. In the southeast, we have Brahmanism, for example. So they're just different aspects and angles on the same stuff back in the 20s. So this is not new, but Huxley pulled it together. And this is basically what he's saying. One of my favorites. So if we look at the points, the first one is there's this unity that underlies the diversity. There is something here that is common to all. Now we call it the interconnected web of life in Unitarianism, but there's more. Okay, and we can directly experience it. We call this the transcending mystery. It transcends, it unifies, it is holding everything, and we can experience it. The third point is that it's the same unity, no matter what culture you're in. Right? So it can be Allah or allow. And this is one of the points that got made in some of the groups, and I'm going to quote Sally, if I may. It's all the same thing. Right? To reconnect with it is the purpose of life. That's what we're here to do. My grandmother used to say, the reason we were born is to become everything we call the Christ. Isn't that an interesting line? to become the person that absolutely knows there is no distinction between who I am and what God is. That there is absolutely no limit to what we are capable of being and doing in the world. So, then, the names are different, but they're all different names of the same thing. So, whether we call the divinity God, or call the divinity Allah, or call the divinity Christ, or call the divinity Goddess, or Mother, or whatever from any tradition, it's all the different names for the same thing. All right. And what we call higher degrees of consciousness are really clearer and clearer connections, or progressive degrees, if you will, of experiencing that unity, and that there are many ways to do that. That there is, in this case, as I'm saying, a scientifically validated way. We call it meditation. So, what is my religion? All of them. At any given time. Now, the Dalai Lama says, go with the tradition you were born in. So, and the reason he's saying is because you've got hooks, you've got emotional hooks and whatever with that stuff. So I was born in a house that celebrated Christmas and Easter. Christmas and Easter are very powerful times, and they bring me back to that core understanding. But in the meantime, through them, with them, and around them, I'm honoring the mother, and what we call the goddess. I'm honoring the Brahman. I'm honoring all of these other names and understandings depending on where I am in any given point in time, right? Because they're the right thing for who I am right now, right? It's all one. It's all the same thing. The differences are about the cultures. If I'm living in the Namibian desert, herding cattle, I am not going to be talking about a church filled with gold and candles, right? I'm going to have a cultural frame for my relationship with the divine. If I'm being a Hopi or a Navajo, I'm going to be drawing on a different set of cultural frameworks. If I grew up in Arabia, in that area, I'm going to have a different set. But those are the only differences. So we say that on the exoteric, the outer edge, it all looks different. But as you go closer and closer through the esoteric, the inner, it is more and more the same. And ultimately, it's just the light. It is the unity. It is the being. So when someone comes and says, what religion are you? All paths that lead to the light, right? Or whatever path in this moment. Or where my heart is calling me to connect with the divinity. You can go with that. Of course, you can also use the technical term. Technically, Unitarian-Universalism is Protestant Christianity. Who knew? All right, but it's not just a spiritual path, it is a philosophy. And a philosophy has a structure, metaphysics, ontology, and all of that stuff. So, the first one, the metaphysics, recognizes this unitary reality that underlies and supports and is part of everything. That is our metaphysics in Unitarian-Universalism. In New Thought, which is the other branch of Unitarian-Universalism, we are saying there is a reality, capital R, that is not what our current experience is most of the time, but we can get to it, right? Then there is a psychology involved, psyche, the study of the psyche, and it says there is a soul, and in that soul there is something that is not separate from, at the very least is the same as, but is not separate from that underlying reality. And then, as all philosophies, we have an ethic. Now, in the Unitarian-Universalist Association, that ethic looks at like social justice, looking for equality, looking at environmental issues, and so on. And this is good. This is the action. And in the New Thought tradition, that ethic says, focus on what is the highest good you can call for in the moment, and then act. And they're the same thing. You get to take it through stages along with everything else, right? It's all the same. In more and more of the Protestant churches in America, we're seeing an environmental ethic begin to emerge and be, encouraged, because there is the realization that the social gospel isn't enough. There has to be a recognition that we are one with all beings, not just with all humanity. All right, we find that our final, and this is Aldous Huxley's language, final end in the knowledge of both the immanent here, now, and transcendent overall, ground of all being, and that it is universal and immemorial, eternal, infinite. Yeah? When we feel that and know that, we have accomplished what we are here to be and do. That was Huxley's understanding of this philosophy. And it is the understanding that is the essence, the esoteric message in all of the world traditions. You can see why I got hooked. So what he is saying also is that that is most distinctly or succinctly expressed in one simple phrase. That thou art, or that art thou. Okay, tat bam asi, tat bam asi, tat bam asi. That's the Sanskrit, right? The immanent, the Atman. The Atman is that soul which is identical to the Brahman, the ground of being. Okay? So the Atman in me recognizes the Atman in you. Namaste. The divinity in me recognizes the divinity in you. Right? So we are all that. And that our last end, our final goal, our priority, our reason for being is to discover that and be that. That's where he was encouraging us to go. So it's recognizing that we got something that's keeping us from experiencing that and breaking through those. The perennial philosophy is getting in touch with the fact that those cultural differences that were on the outside of that wheel have caused us to forget that there is this unity that is the essence of our being, all beings, everywhere. And we need to break through that. We need to break through the cultural differences, the cultural defining distinctions. Yeah? Yeah. So, once we realize that that's what it's about, we realize that most of our lives we've taken the long way around. Yeah. And part of that is because our particular culture says nothing is easy, you have to work for it. All right? This is actually a tradition in the Native American traditions. This is usually presented in, notice it says Great Spirit. Okay? This is a Native American recognition. You can spend your life trying to be one with the Great Spirit. Or choose love and be it. Choose to be love. Choose to know yourself as loved, beloved, loving, and ultimately the embodiment of love. And then all the rest is done. That's it. Unfortunately, where'd you go? You're going to take me back. There we go. We've got those beliefs and fears and egos that try to keep us from remembering that. So the real work, really the only work, is to dissolve those and choose love. Oh, hi fear. No. Oh, hi belief that the world's not okay. Love. We just, look, I have this thought, but I don't have to live with it. You don't have to believe all your thoughts. You just have to choose and be what you know. All right, why did it do that? I don't know. Here we go. All right, so remember I said I'd get back to ages and stages. This is a very nice graph. I like this graph. Because it doesn't say something is better than something else or more mature. It just says it includes it. And the truth is we are all of those spheres. All the time. But we tend to focus down there at the bottom one. The one in the core, in the middle of all of that. We tend to focus on, I'm a scientist, I don't believe all of that. Or, I'm a mystic and I don't believe all of that. All right. One of the things I've loved about watching our culture over the last 20, 30 years has been this whole New Age thing. It's nothing new. That's true. The word New Age was introduced in about 1820, and it actually is present in some writings as early as 1620. But the recognition that there is some new way of being unfolding through us and as we recognize our intuition and we honor holism. Well, the word holism is saying there is one reality, one underlying wholeness of which we are a part. Funny thing. Right? So holistic thinking is the way the scientists come in. That's how I was able to do it through the sciences. Okay, system, whole, system, whole, system, whole. See how it is all one? And then the intuition is the way the woo-woo folks come in, right? Oh, yeah, I can feel that. I can connect with that. Oh, look at that. We're all connected, right? So, we come in from both angles to what is now the New Age. Yay! But that then leads us into this next stage, which if I stay in the realm of intuition and woo-woo, it looks like occultism. You know what the word occult means? Hidden. That's all it means. It doesn't have anything to do with anything other than it's been hidden. All right? Remember in the New Testament, those of you who grew up on it, let him who has ears to hear what I have to say. Right? Right? It was hidden in what he was actually saying. When Emerson gave, Channing, the guy who did the reading we just read, was Emerson's teacher. And what Emerson would do is bury in his very long, complex sentences. Sometimes his sentences are a whole paragraph, and sometimes his paragraph are 2 or 3 pages, right? And in this thing, he's buried this gem. Very intentionally, I found out. He says, let that which has been published still be hidden. All right. He's intentionally burying that because, frankly, some of his audiences would have tarred and feathered him if they really heard what he was saying. Right? So this occult thing, but ultimately it's about gnosis. And remember what in the Perennial philosophy description, it says you've got to discover who you really are. And that means you have to know from within. Gnosis is the Greek term from inner knowing. Inner knowing. So as we move into that inner knowing, as we give ourselves permission to be scientific and intuitive and mystical all at once, because we are all of that. And we are growing up and living in a very materialist culture which says this is the only thing that's real. Well, of course, sometimes I'm going to think the body is what's real and forget that it's the soul that's real, that's manifesting the body, because the soul is part of the one and the body is just an experience. We live in a culture that keeps helping us forget that. All right, which then leads us to this awakening. Now, there's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one of Freud's students, an Italian, Roberto Stagioli, who developed something called psychosynthesis. But one of the things that he contributed to the literature that I have not seen anyone contribute is the difference between a psychotic break and a spiritual awakening. And he advises his fellow shrinks to recognize the difference, and he shows them how. What a remarkable gift, right? But the culture doesn't know that yet. So one of the things we get to do is support our friends who think they're going through a psychotic break and help them understand, wait a minute, no, this is just a spiritual emergency. This is a spiritual awakening. So as a minister, part of my job is to recognize that difference and to be with someone and to help them through this spiritual crisis that they think is a psychic breakdown. So it's okay. It's okay. So you start to feel like your psyche's falling apart, call me. Finally, that gets us to that integral recognition. So this is a marvelous chart of who we are and where we're going, and the essence of what the perennial philosophy is teaching us. And Ken Wilber, who is the current embodiment of that with the integral studies, and he did that book, No Boundary, I talked about earlier, tells us that meditation is the tool. It's the way to get there. That's all it is. It's not tied to a particular religion. Okay? It is the last line. First and foremost, a search for the God within. Experiencing Atman as Brahman. Experiencing soul as spirit. Experiencing the higher self, the Holy Spirit, alive in us. Experiencing the Great Spirit as who we are. That's what it's about. Now, meditation isn't necessarily sitting and contemplating the navel and going, oh, although that works really nicely. There are other ways to do it. Walking, swimming. Anytime your normal thought pattern is turned off. Dancing with the goddess. Yes. Dancing anytime, if you can do it, right? Whatever you can experience. Washing dishes if you let yourself. That was what I had to do when the kids were little and I was working 2 jobs. Yeah, washing dishes, that was my meditation. Right? You know, whatever allows you to shut down the chatter and allow that soul, spirit, self to become your experience. That's what meditation is. So, I can have all knowledge and still have no answers. For answers do not come from knowledge, but rather spring forth from the quiet within. Spring forth from the quiet within. So the essence of this thing that is common to all humanity, stop, go inside, and discover what is real now.